My family's golden child destroyed my $6,000 hearing aids. Now they blame me for ruining his life after I took him to court. My family is all on my cousin's side for this issue, and I wanted some outside judgment. My cousin, 25 Manor, has always been the golden child of our generation. He's funny, good-looking, and outgoing, not to mention a boy amongst girls. He's always loved to mess around and play pranks. For the record, I really dislike this cousin. I think he's irresponsible, childish, and annoying. I have had hearing problems for years. I recently got a $6,000 pair of hearing aids. Recently, at my grandmother's birthday party, we were all eating and drinking on the back porch. My grandmother has a pool. My cousin decided he was going to throw me in the pool because it would be funny to ruin my hair that I just got done that day. I repeatedly told him to stop and put me down, in a very serious and not playful at all tone. He threw me in the pool, and my hearing aids were ruined. Afterward, when I told him what happened, he basically said, "Whoops, didn't know you had hearing aids now." When I told him the cost of them and that he would have to replace them, he freaked out and said no way. My family didn't want me to make him pay for them because I significantly out-earn him and also everyone else in the family. He was in college at the time, barely making ends meet in a call center job. His girlfriend and him have a baby and they live in a one-bedroom apartment. He refused to pay, so I took him to court. I won. He refused to make the payments after, so I took him back to court and his wages are now being garnished for the maximum amount, which is 20% of his total wages. It pushed him over the edge of what he could afford, so he's had to work extra and drop out of college to be able to pay their rent. My family is absolutely fuming at me. I think he made one bad choice after the other, and he has never given a sincere apology during this whole ordeal. Had he gave a real apology after the incident and asked if he could wait till he finished school to pay me back, I would have been fine with it. But the entitled little prick is digging his feet in at every move. Eta? The only reason I could see me maybe being the asshole is because it's affecting his child and girlfriend. Update 1. Things got even worse after my cousin's wages started getting garnished. At first, I thought I'd feel some kind of relief, maybe even vindication, for holding him accountable for his actions. But what I didn't expect was just how much of the family would turn against me because of it. It started with small comments at family gatherings, like my mom saying, "We all make mistakes," or my aunt making these dramatic sighs whenever I was around. At first, I ignored it, but then things escalated. The worst part was when my mom decided to sit me down for what she called a heart-to-heart, but what felt more like a lecture. "You know," she started, "family should come first. I get that you're upset, but you're punishing all of us, not just him. You're making this so much bigger than it needs to be." I looked at her in disbelief. Bigger than it needed to be? My cousin threw me into a pool, knowing full well that I didn't want him to, and in doing so, he destroyed something that cost me $6,000. It wasn't just about money. It was about my hearing, my independence. I felt completely unheard in the conversation, but at the same time, I could feel the weight of her words. Maybe I was punishing the whole family, but wasn't that because they kept enabling him? It wasn't just my mom either. My aunt, who has always been my cousin's biggest fan, ramped things up. At first, it was just side comments, but then I received an actual handwritten letter from her. She said something along the lines of, "I can't believe you'd do this to family. He's struggling and you're just kicking him while he's down. All for what? A couple of fancy gadgets?" I couldn't believe what I was reading. Fancy gadgets? Is that what she thought of my hearing aids? I felt like no one understood the significance of what had happened. I wasn't asking for an apology for the sake of an apology. I wanted him to acknowledge that what he did was reckless, that it cost me something more than just money. It felt like the whole family was just brushing off the fact that I needed those hearing aids to function, and now I had to go through the trouble of replacing them. The situation at family events became unbearable. Whenever I'd show up, there'd be this tense silence, like everyone was waiting for the inevitable argument. At one point, during my grandmother's weekly Sunday lunch, my cousin decided to make a snarky comment about how he hoped I'd had a good week garnishing his wages. I couldn't take it anymore. "Do you have any idea what this has been like for me?" I snapped, and the entire table went quiet. "You threw me into a pool after I repeatedly told you not to. You ruined my hearing aids, and instead of taking responsibility, you brushed it off like it was no big deal. You never apologized. Not really. And now I'm supposed to feel bad because you have consequences?" My cousin rolled his eyes, and that was when I lost it. I started laying out exactly what those hearing aids meant to me, how much I had struggled with hearing issues for years, and how they had given me a sense of normalcy again. And yet, everyone seemed more concerned about how he was affected by having to pay for the damage he caused. And that's when my grandmother chimed in. She tried to be the voice of reason, like she always does, saying, "We're all family here, and we need to find a way to heal. Maybe you two can talk this out without all the court drama. We don't need legal battles tearing us apart." I could tell she meant well, but I wasn't ready to let it go, not after everything that had happened. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle of the whole thing. If I let this slide, what message was I sending? That it's okay to hurt someone and never take accountability because you're family? Still, part of me did feel a little guilty, mostly because of his girlfriend and their baby. I wasn't trying to ruin their lives, but at the same time, my cousin's refusal to take responsibility for his actions was what had led us here in the first place. It wasn't like I had jumped to garnishing his wages. I'd given him a chance to make things right, and he hadn't taken it. A couple of weeks later, I got a text from his girlfriend. She had stayed mostly out of this whole mess, but now she was asking if we could meet up for coffee. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. When we sat down, she seemed nervous, like she wasn't sure how to start. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I'm not here to make excuses for him," she began, "but I just want you to know that this has been really hard on us. He's not handling it well, and it's affecting our relationship, our family." I wanted to snap back and remind her that it was his fault, not mine, but something about the way she was talking made me stop. She wasn't here to argue, and she wasn't trying to make me feel guilty. She was just laying out how things were for them, and I appreciated that honesty. "I get it," I said, "but you have to understand that this wasn't just some small prank. I lost something important to me, and he didn't even care enough to say sorry." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I know," she said quietly. "And I think he knows it too. He's too proud to admit it." That line stuck with me. Maybe he did know he had messed up, but his pride was in the way. Not that it excused anything, but it did make me wonder if I had been waiting for something that might never come. Was I holding on to this because I needed an apology? Or was it more than that? I wasn't sure anymore. After that, I decided to take a step back. I didn't attend as many family events, and I stopped engaging with the drama. I figured if they wanted to keep siding with him, let them. I wasn't going to keep fighting the same fight over and over again. I had won in court, and that was that. But then something unexpected happened. A couple of months after my conversation with his girlfriend, I got another text, this time from my cousin. He wanted to meet up. Part of me didn't want to go. I was tired of this whole mess, but something told me I should hear him out, so I agreed. When we met, he was surprisingly subdued. Gone was the cocky attitude I had grown so used to, and in its place was someone who actually looked defeated. "I messed up," he said, barely making eye contact. "I know I did. I shouldn't have thrown you in the pool. I didn't think about the hearing aids, and that was stupid. I'm sorry." I was shocked. I hadn't expected an apology, not after all this time. But there it was. "I appreciate that," I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "But it wasn't just about the hearing aids. It was the way you acted after, like it didn't matter." He nodded. "I know. And I'm sorry for that too. I was just embarrassed, and I didn't know how to handle it. But I'm trying to make things right." We talked for a while longer, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually communicating. I wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but I did feel like maybe, just maybe, we were on the path to fixing things. As for the money, I decided to let it go. The wage garnishments would continue until the debt was paid, but I told him I wouldn't pursue anything beyond that. I wasn't looking to ruin his life. I just wanted him to understand that actions have consequences, even if you're family. Update 2. After that conversation with my cousin, I thought things might start calming down, but instead, the pressure from my family only got worse. It was as if, by me taking that small step toward mending things with him, they saw an opening to finally gang up on me. They must have thought that if I was willing to meet up with him, I'd be willing to cave and let it all go. The day after our conversation, my aunt, his mom, called me. I hadn't spoken to her directly since the whole court ordeal started, so I knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant chat. She didn't bother with any pleasantries. "You've caused enough damage, don't you think?" she said, her voice sharp. "He's apologized, and you're still punishing him. How can you live with yourself knowing what you've done to him and his family?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Had my cousin conveniently left out the part where he hadn't even tried to pay me back until he was forced to? Where he had refused to take any responsibility until the courts made him? Where he'd been nothing but dismissive and entitled this entire time? "I'm not punishing him," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I'm holding him accountable. He ruined something important to me, and I gave him a chance to make it right. He didn't, so I took legal action. That's not punishment. It's consequences for his actions." She scoffed. "You're hurting his baby. You're hurting all of us. You make more money than anyone in this family, and yet you're taking it from someone who barely has enough to survive. It's cruel." That last word hit me harder than I expected. Cruel. Was I being cruel? I didn't think so, but the more she spoke, the more that doubt crept in. I had been so focused on standing my ground, on making sure my cousin paid for what he had done, that I hadn't considered how it was impacting his child. Was it fair to take food off that kid's table just because my cousin had acted like an idiot? But then I remembered the months of frustration, of feeling dismissed, of being told to just get over it by everyone in my family, while my cousin sat there, smug and unapologetic. I hadn't jumped straight to legal action. I'd given him a chance, and he had blown it. Now I was supposed to be the one to forgive and forget, just because he had finally, begrudgingly said sorry? I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, I told her, trying to hold my ground. I'm doing this because he needs to learn that actions have consequences. He threw me in a pool after I told him not to. He destroyed my hearing aids. And instead of apologizing or offering to make it right, he brushed it off. This didn't need to go this far, but he refused to take responsibility. She wasn't having it. You're heartless, she spat, before hanging up. After that call, I was left feeling conflicted. It wasn't like I hadn't considered the impact this was having on his family. I wasn't trying to make things harder for his kid or his girlfriend, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore how dismissive and entitled he had been. Every time I thought about backing down, I'd remember the way he had laughed after throwing me in the pool, the way he had brushed off the damage he'd caused, and it reminded me why I had fought so hard for accountability in the first place. Things with my immediate family weren't any better. My mom, who had tried to stay neutral at first, started dropping hints that I should just let it go. She'd bring up old family stories about how my grandmother had forgiven my uncle when he'd stolen money from her, or how one of my aunts had bailed my cousin out of trouble after a DUI. Family forgives, she kept saying, as if that was supposed to erase everything. But where does it stop, Mom? I asked her one day when she brought it up again. When do we stop letting him get away with things just because he's family? He's never had to deal with consequences. That's why he's like this. Everyone keeps bailing him out, and I'm tired of it. She sighed, giving me that disappointed look I've seen too many times. I know he messed up, but he's struggling, and I just don't want this to tear us all apart. I wanted to scream. Why was it my responsibility to keep the family together? Why was I the one who had to bend and break just to make everyone else comfortable? I hadn't been the one to ruin a $6,000 pair of hearing aids. I wasn't the one who had refused to apologize. Yet, somehow, I was the bad guy in this situation. But then, something unexpected happened. My cousin's girlfriend reached out to me again. This time, she asked if we could meet at a park so her baby could play while we talked. I hesitated at first, unsure if I wanted to get dragged into more family drama, but curiosity got the best of me, so I agreed. When I arrived, she was sitting on a bench, looking exhausted. The baby was playing nearby, completely unaware of all the tension surrounding him. She greeted me with a tired smile and gestured for me to sit next to her. I'm sorry for bothering you again, she started, her voice soft. I know this has been a mess, and I don't want to take sides, but I wanted to talk, woman to woman. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. He's been difficult, she admitted, glancing over at the baby. More than you probably know. He's been so angry about everything, but it's not just about the money. He feels like he's lost his place in the family. Everyone's turned against him, and it's really hard on him. I raised an eyebrow. He's the one who ruined my hearing aids, though. He didn't take responsibility. What did he expect would happen? She sighed, rubbing her temples. I know. Believe me, I know. I'm not excusing what he did. But he's not handling this well, and it's making things worse. He's embarrassed. He feels like a failure. He doesn't know how to fix things. I frowned. But he never even tried to fix it. I didn't go to court right away. I gave him time. She nodded. I know, and I wish he had done the right thing from the start. But now, with the wage garnishment, he feels like he's drowning. He's dropped out of school, and he's working extra shifts just to keep us afloat. It's not good, and I don't know what to do. I felt a pang of guilt hearing about how much they were struggling, but at the same time, it wasn't like I had caused this. He had. He could have fixed it months ago, but instead he had dragged it out until things got this bad. I don't know what you expect me to do, I said finally. I can't just let him off the hook. She nodded slowly, looking down at her hands. I'm not asking you to. I wanted to talk. To let you know that it's not just about the money anymore. It's about his pride, his place in the family. He's struggling, and I don't know how to help him. I sat there unsure of what to say. Part of me felt bad for her and the baby. They didn't deserve to suffer because of my cousin's actions. But at the same time, I didn't want to let him off the hook. I couldn't. After a long silence, I finally spoke. I'll think about it, I said. But I can't promise anything. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you, she said quietly, before turning her attention back to her child. As I left the park, I felt more conflicted than ever. I didn't want to be the reason they were struggling, but I also didn't want to back down from the principle of the matter. I wasn't sure what the right thing to do was anymore. Over the next few days, I mulled over our conversation. I could see that my cousin was suffering, but at the same time, he had brought this on himself. Should I feel guilty for holding him accountable, or was this just the natural consequence of his actions? The line between right and wrong was becoming blurrier with every passing day, and I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. Update 3. After my conversation with my cousin's girlfriend, I thought I'd finally hit rock bottom in terms of family drama. I was wrong. Things only got worse. The family had already made it clear where they stood, but now it felt like they were determined to push me to my breaking point. Texts started flooding in. Calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. And it wasn't just my aunt anymore. Now it was cousins, second cousins, even some of my siblings. They all had one message. I needed to drop the garnishment. For the sake of the family. For the sake of his family. It was relentless. One text from my older sister stood out. "You're better than this," she wrote. "You know he can't handle this. He's not like you. You've always been strong. Why are you doing this to him?" It felt like a slap in the face. The implication that I was somehow being too harsh, that because I had worked hard to build a stable life for myself, I should let everyone else off the hook, felt so unfair. I had a long conversation with my mom after that. She's always been the one to give me the most level-headed advice, even though she was clearly on my cousin's side. She sat me down in her living room, a cup of tea in her hands, and just said, "I don't want this to destroy us." "I'm not the one who's destroying anything," I replied, feeling the frustration rise in my chest again. "He's the one who did this. He could have paid me back, or at least tried to. But he didn't. Why am I the bad guy for standing up for myself?" Mom sighed, her eyes soft with concern. "It's not about right or wrong anymore, honey. It's about how this is affecting the people you love. Sometimes being right doesn't fix everything." I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Was I letting this whole thing consume me? Was I more concerned about winning than about the actual problem? I had been so focused on standing up for myself, on making sure my cousin faced consequences, that I hadn't really stopped to think about what I was losing in the process. But then, out of nowhere, my cousin showed up at my door. It was late. Too late for any kind of casual visit, and I hesitated to answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His hair was a mess, his clothes wrinkled, and there were deep bags under his eyes. For the first time, he didn't have that cocky smirk on his face. He looked defeated. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly, barely able to meet my gaze. I nodded and stepped aside, unsure of what to expect. He walked into my living room and sat down on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with his hands. After a long, awkward silence, he finally spoke. "I messed up," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up bad." I stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. "I've been an idiot. I didn't take it seriously, and I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I've been blaming everyone else, blaming you, but the truth is, this is all my fault." He paused, swallowing hard. "I lost everything. I dropped out of school. I barely see my kid anymore because I'm always working. And, well, my girlfriend left me." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "She left you?" He nodded, his hands trembling. "She couldn't take it anymore. The stress, the fighting. I put it all on her and she had enough." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt a surge of satisfaction. He was finally facing the consequences of his actions. But another part of me couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He had lost so much, more than I had ever intended for him to lose. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," he continued, his voice cracking. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to understand. I'm sorry. For everything. I was a jerk, and I took everything for granted. I never thought about how much damage I was causing. I thought I could just laugh it off like I always do. But this time, I ruined my life." I took a deep breath, trying to process what he was saying. He had never apologized like this before. Never shown this kind of vulnerability. It was a stark contrast to the arrogant, carefree cousin I had known my entire life. "I'm not asking you to drop the garnishment," he said, surprising me. "I know I need to pay you back. I'm going to find a way to make it work, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry." For the first time in months, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel like I needed to fight anymore. It was as if the weight of all the resentment I had been carrying started to lift, just a little. I could see how much he was struggling, and for the first time, I believed that he actually regretted what he had done. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, not wanting to give too much or too little. "But you have to understand. I didn't want things to get this far. I didn't want to ruin your life. I just wanted you to take responsibility." He nodded, his eyes red and swollen. "I know. And I'm going to. I swear." We talked for a while longer, and by the time he left, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't like everything was magically fixed, but it felt like a turning point. A moment where we could start to move past the bitterness and anger. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. My cousin, true to his word, started making small payments toward the hearing aids. They weren't much, just what he could afford. But it was a start. And for the first time, I felt like he was really trying. The family pressure didn't disappear overnight, but it started to ease up. My aunt still wasn't happy with me, and some of my cousins still gave me the cold shoulder at family events. But the constant barrage of guilt trips and emotional manipulation slowed down. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. As for my cousin, he was slowly picking up the pieces of his life. He started going to therapy, something I never thought I'd see him do, and he was working on being a better father. He and his girlfriend were still separated, but they were co-parenting, and he was doing his best to repair that relationship too. Looking back on everything, I still don't regret taking him to court. He needed to learn that his actions had consequences, and I needed to stand up for myself. But I also realized that sometimes the lines between right and wrong can get blurry. Holding someone accountable is important, but so is empathy. I didn't have to forgive him or forget what he did, but I could let go of the anger that had been weighing me down for so long. At the end of the day, it wasn't about the money. It was about respect. And finally, after everything we'd been through, I felt like I had gotten some of that back.